Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us at today's virtual meeting of the DNC Credentials Committee. I hereby call this meeting of the Credentials Committee to order. My name is Jay Jacobs, and I'm from New York, and I am serving today as the acting chair of the Credentials Committee. Thank you again for joining us. This will be the last meeting of this committee, with the appointment of the new committee members to be voted on at Saturday's DNC meeting. As a reminder, this is an official meeting of the committee. We are live streaming these proceedings on the DNC's YouTube channel so that we can have an official record of our deliberations. At this time, I ask all of you to join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God. Thank you. The next item on our agenda is the determination of a quorum. I will now ask our parliamentarian, Helen McFadden, to call the roll.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Since folks are muted, the best way to say present might be to use the raised hand feature. So if you can do that, I'd appreciate it. I'm going to start through the roll at this point in time. Ms. Beafor, I see her. Ms. Estrada, I do not see her. Mr. Fry, I see him. Mr. Heredia, I thought I had seen him earlier.
Present.
Thank you. Ms. Young Hung, I see her. Mr. Martinez has given his proxy to Ms. Young Hung. Mr. Ortiz?
I'm here, present.
Thank you. Ms. Vasquez? I see her. Mr. Wabi has given his proxy to Mr. Jacobs. Mr. Bolin? I see him. Ms. Framer? I see her. Ms. Goodsell? Don't see Member Gazelle. And she had indicated she would be here. I'm sorry, I'm being told Mr. Wabi is in fact here. Okay. So there's no proxy there. Mr. Wabi is present. Mr. Cap, he's present. Ms. Lucas, I see her. Ms. Nolasco, I see her. Ms. Penske has given her proxy to Ms. Lucas. Mr. Wade, Ms. Ward. I do not see Ms. Ward. Okay, Mr. Chairman, we have present 15 members in person or by proxy, which is definitely a quorum.
Very good. Thank you. Before we get underway, I want to recognize the team who helped us tackle this important work. In addition to Helen, who is the party's long-serving parliamentarian, we are joined by the party affairs staff and interns, as well as the DNC counsel, Graham Wilson, and Meredith Parnell. And finally, I want to thank the technical support team who are running the Zoom the Zoom meeting for us today, ensuring that this is live streamed through the DNC's YouTube channel. Thank you, everyone, for helping to make sure our meeting runs smoothly. If you have any questions about the Credentials Committee's work, please don't hesitate to contact our amazing team. Before we move into the business of the meeting, I want to remind you that members will be muted unless they are recognized to speak, at which point they will be introduced and unmuted by the staff. If a member would like to be recognized for comments or questions, please use the raise your hand feature, which we just used in our Zoom, or send a chat to Liz Mariapen. Liz is the Assistant Director of the Party Affairs Office. When you raise your hand or send your chat to Liz, she will create a queue that I can use to call on each member. I might ask her to actually call on them depending upon what is easier. When it is your turn to speak, you will be announced and unmuted. We will do our best to call on everyone in the order you seek recognition, but please be patient with us. If you have any questions or comments before we get started, please submit them in the chat to Liz or raise your hand via Zoom, and staff will help us make sure that you are recognized. Okay, seeing no further questions, we will move to new business. New business. We have one item of business before the committee today, which is the consideration of a challenge to the election of Puerto Rico's national committeeman. On Monday, you all should have received an email with a link to review all of the materials and briefs pertaining to this challenge. You also received a copy of the report of our hearing officer, Michael Lewis. Before we hear from Mr. Lewis and the parties in this challenge, there is one last housekeeping item. We have received a request from the counsel for the challenging party asking that the members of this committee from Puerto Rico recuse themselves on this matter. I have communicated to the council that there is no provision in the Credentials Committee's rules, nor has it been this committee's practice to mandate the committee members recuse themselves. That is a decision the committee members will make for themselves. I have conveyed the request with both of our members from Puerto Rico and suggested that council could either make this request to the members directly or make the request today during the time they are allotted for their arguments. After this challenge was originally filed with our committee, we deferred and referred the matter to the Democratic Party of Puerto Rico, or the DPPR, for consideration. The DPPR voted to deny the challenge, after which the challenger appealed to the full Credentials Committee in accordance with our rules. We retained Michael Lewis as the hearing officer. Mr. Lewis has more than 30 years of dispute resolution experience and is a nationally acclaimed mediator. Mr. Lewis conducted a mediation session with an evidentiary hearing with the parties. The hearing on this challenge was conducted via Zoom on September the 15th. I understand that the hearing took 7 hours. Rule 6G13 provides for the hearing officer to file a written report to the committee. The report includes findings of fact, conclusions of law, and a recommendation for disposition of the challenge. Mr. Lewis's report was provided to all parties to the challenge and to the committee members on Monday. Neither the DPPR decision nor Mr. Lewis's recommendations are binding on this committee. With that, I will now ask our hearing officer, Mr. Lewis, to present his report on this challenge. Mr. Lewis will be here for the entire meeting and will be available to answer your questions. Please, I ask all the members, hold your questions until after we hear from Mr. Lewis and hear the arguments by both parties. You may raise your hand at any time, but I will not open the floor for questions until it is time for committee members to debate. Mr. Lewis.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jacobs, and good afternoon, everyone. Mr. Jacobs, you have actually gone over sort of the procedural history of the challenge, so I won't repeat that, and we'll just launch into a discussion of my report and recommendations. So the question presented in this challenge is, whether Mr. Luis de Villa-Pernas was domiciled in Puerto Rico at the time that he filed his candidacy for national committeeman in April of 2020. And to get to the end of the road, I think we need to start by a brief history of Mr. de Villa-Pernas's last 5 years, essentially. He moved from Puerto Rico to the Washington, D.C. area early in 2017 to be deputy director of the Puerto Rico Federal tried to remember the precise name of the Federal Affairs Administration. In late 2017, he left the Federal Affairs Administration and went to work at DLA Piper, a major international law firm. He remains an associate at DLA Piper, listed by the firm as resident in their Washington, D.C. office. Mr. de Villa-Pernas and his family made repeated trips back to Puerto Rico during their time in the Washington, D.C. area. However, they had leased their home in Puerto Rico in early 2017 and did not move back into it until late October, early November of 2020. So that history will come back to as I go further in this in my report. So there are a number of factors that I looked at to determine whether Mr. de Villa-Pernas had indeed lost his domicile in Puerto Rico. The rule under which this is being challenged says that at the time of filing his notice of candidacy, Mr. de Villa-Pernas had to file a had to file a sorry, I'm just I'm trying to find the precise rule that one of the rules that governs here. Okay. Under the rules of the Democratic Party of Puerto Rico, says that at the time, a notice of candidacy requires the candidate's occupation, city or town, and senatorial district of domicile, home and post office addresses. The Electoral Code of Puerto Rico of 2020, Article 5.43b, provides that homes or dwellings leased or transferred of any kind to third parties that limit the voter's constant access to occupy it shall not be considered as the voter's domicile for electoral purposes. As I said earlier, the de Villa-Pernas family had no access to their home except for the purposes of figuring out what maintenance or repairs were needed from early 2017 until late 2020. Mr. de Villaparnas has steadfastly stated that he always fully intended to return to Puerto Rico. And there were a number of indices of that. They did not sell their family home. They did lease it, but they did not sell their family home. They kept a car in Puerto Rico. They had the family had Puerto Rico Rican bank accounts. But in November of 2019, apparently the lease was up in the end of 2019 or beginning of 2020. Mr. de Villaparnas extended that lease through mid-July. And this was formally accomplished in January of 20 when he sent an email confirming with the lessor that the lease would be extended. He further extended the lease until mid-October of 2020. And Mr. de Villaparnas has cited both the pandemic and he has two young children, his children's health issues as the reason for the extensions. The extensions in January they actually were negotiated over from November to December of the 2019, and the extension could not possibly have had anything to do with the pandemic. It was not until early to mid-March of 2020 that we all realized that, in fact, we were facing a global pandemic, and travel began to be shut down. So that any extension that occurred before that time must have had something to do with some reason other than the pandemic. Similarly, Mr. de Villaparnas' son, the younger of his two children, who was born in December of 2018, was born with a cleft palate. And apparently you need about a year before you can operate on that cleft palate, so that Mr. de Villaparnas knew as of sometime in early 2019 that his son likely would undergo an operation in late 2019. But he did not cite the specific issue of an operation for his son as a reason for the extension. So it raises the question of why the extension. Any extension made after, say, mid-March of 2020, I fully give credit to the notion that no sane person would willingly get on an airplane if he or she could avoid it, especially with a young child who had recently had an operation. So the fact that the de Villaparnas family remained in the Washington metropolitan area until late October, I do not second guess that decision, and believe that it has no bearing on the question of his domicile. The matter that is, I thought, most provocative in this is the question of to which sovereign was Mr. de Villaparnas paying taxes. And the parties stipulated that Mr. de Villaparnas did not pay taxes in Puerto Rico in 2018 or 2019, but did in 2020. And a tax expert testified at the hearing that if Mr. de Villaparnas was working half of his time in the Puerto Rican office of DLA Piper, which was his testimony, and half in Washington, D.C., he should have been paying taxes in Puerto Rico. He did not pay those taxes, and I believe that means that he lost his domicile in Puerto Rico at least by 2018. I do not believe that he could have lost his domicile while working for the Federal Affairs Administration. My analogy is to Foreign Service officers in the United States who do not lose their domicile when working overseas for the federal government. So that was my conclusion. My recommendation is that Mr. de Villaparnas should be removed from his position as DNC National Committeeman because he had lost his domicile. And I further said that I fear the recommendation is pointless because under the rules, the DPPR Central Committee has to fill the vacancy, and my concern is that they would simply refill the vacancy with Mr. de Villaparnas because he is back in Puerto Rico with his family, back in their family home, and as far as I'm concerned, has recovered his domicile. There is one further recommendation that I made, and that is the challenger has suggested as part of his challenge that he should be installed as the national committeeman from Puerto Rico if the Credentials Committee finds that Mr. de Villaparnas should be removed from office. I declined on at least 3 grounds. The first is that DPPR has a rule providing for how the vacancy is to be filled. The second is the relationship between Mr. Dominish, the challenger, and at least some members of the DPPR is fraught. The record is fraught with I guess bile and bitterness. And third, the DPPR has just recently changed its rules to encourage voter participation in choosing national committeemen, and I would hope that the DPPR could find a way to continue and encourage that participation. And I will stop now and be prepared to answer any questions that anyone might have.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Lewis. We sincerely appreciate your assistance with this challenge. We know it's complicated and you've done a great job. Now we're going to hear from the chair of the Democratic Party of Puerto Rico for a brief statement. Chairman Rodriguez, thank you for joining us today and welcome. And we've allotted up to 5 minutes for your statement. Good to see you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, members of the committee, for allowing me to do these brief remarks concerning the matter before you. For the first time in 30 years, the Democratic Party of Puerto Rico held a reorganization election open to all Democrats in the island. Any Democrat who wanted to run for any position within the local party could file online up to mid-April of 2020. Unfortunately, the pandemic forced us to postpone the election on several occasions, and it was held on November 21st, 2020, open to all Democrats. The only requisites to be able to vote were to register as a Democrat and be a valid voter in Puerto Rico. Thousands participated, and Mr. Luis Davila was reelected as our national committee man with 78% of the votes cast that day. He has been our national committee man since 2017. The challenge before you was filed locally 36 hours before the election held on November. And we could not resolve that within the 36 hours before the election. However, the Democratic Party of Puerto Rico did address the challenge with transparency and fairness in accordance to the rules of the Democratic Party of Puerto Rico, the DNC bylaws, the guidelines recommended in a letter by the co-chairs of the Credentials Committee, John Curry and Karen Carter Peterson. All parties to the challenge were heard and ample opportunity to present their allegations, facts, and evidence. An outside independent counsel was engaged by the Democratic Party of Puerto Rico to evaluate the evidence and submit his recommendation on Mr. Davila's residency based in the totality of the circumstances, which is the test that our local courts have used to determine domicile. The executive committee, in a public access meeting, considered and delivered counsel's report recommending dismissal of the challenge and voted unanimously to that end. Counsel was present to answer questions of the different members of the executive committee. Then the matter was brought to the Central Committee, also in a public access meeting where the matter was fully debated. Counsel was also present to answer questions regarding this report. In a vote 25-4, the Central Committee members adopted the report recommendation that the challenge should be dismissed and that Mr. Davila, using the test adopted by the local courts in Puerto Rico, the totality of the circumstances was domiciled. And there's also a case that was resolved recently in Puerto Rico that said that the date that we need to look when someone is challenged his domicile in order to have a position, that date that has to be looked at is the date when the person was elected and where the person was certified. Even if there was some doubt, which we do not have locally in Puerto Rico, as to the totality of the circumstances that make Mr. Davila a bona fide domiciled resident in Puerto Rico, the truth is that even the report by Mr. Lewis recognizes that by the date of his election and the date of his certification, Mr. Davila, was no doubt a resident of Puerto Rico. So according to that, and according to the local law in Puerto Rico, it does come to the conclusion that Mr. Davila is a resident of Puerto Rico and therefore should continue being our national committee man. I would like to ask the members of this committee to have deference toward our state committee. We did everything by the book. We did everything according to what was told we had to do. And once we looked at everything, and we even had outside counsel, we came to a determination. I think the Credentials Committee should really validate what we had done in Puerto Rico. We had done a process, as I said, a transparent process, a fair process, open to everyone. And I believe that you should give us that deference because state parties are important for the Democratic Party, and I don't think they should be ignored when we have done things according to our rules, our bylaws, and the guidelines that were submitted by the former chairs of this committee. So I would ask you to validate what the Democratic Party of Puerto Rico did. Thank you.
And thank you, Chairman Rodriguez. We appreciate your comments today. Now we are going to move to the consideration of the Puerto Rico challenge. I'd like to acknowledge the representatives from the challengers and the respondents to begin their presentations. First, let me make those acknowledgments. Appearing on behalf of the challenger, we have Mr. Joseph Sandler and Mr. Francisco Dominic. Appearing on behalf of the respondents, Carlos J. Segardia Abreu and Mr. Luis de Valle Parnas. And as a reminder, each side is entitled to 15 minutes of oral argument in front of the Credentials Committee. Each side may be represented by counsel during the oral argument if they so choose. However, no more than 2 counsel each for the proponent and opponent of the pending matter are permitted to speak during each 15-minute argument. For members, there will be a time for questions, so please hold them until the presentations are complete. Now, the presentation of the challenging party. The challenging party is now recognized to present their arguments. You will have 15 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and members of the Credentials Committee, and thank you for the opportunity to make a presentation about why this challenge should be sustained. Mr. Chairman, could I ask to reserve 4 minutes of my time for rebuttal after the presentation of the challenged party?
You have 15 minutes, and my understanding is that you use the 15 minutes in totality. So I would prefer that you just use your 15 minutes.
Okay, understood. Thank you. So as you heard from the hearing officer, after reviewing the submissions of documents, a day-long hearing, presentation of all the relevant evidence, the hearing officer appointed by the DNC found that the challenge party, Mr. Davila Pernas, was not eligible to run for the position of a DNC member for Puerto Rico at the time he filed his candidacy. Mr. Francisco Domenech, I think some of you probably don't know him. He's been a loyal and active Democrat, supporting the Democratic Party both in Puerto Rico and on the mainland. He was the founder of the Puerto Rico Young Democrats in 2003. Elected 3 times as a DNC National Committeeman representing the Young Democrats, that no one else has achieved in the 90-year history of that organization. Served as deputy campaign manager, then campaign manager for Hillary Clinton in 2008 and 16. Worked in numerous other campaigns and as a significant donor to the Democrats, state parties, and Democratic candidates up and down the ballot. He sought a seat on the DNC from Puerto Rico in the 2020 election. That election was postponed 3 times from May 29th to August 15th, then to September 26th, finally in November. Mr. Domenech, who filed his candidacy in April, along with Mr. Davila Pernas, was not notified of any of those postponements. He found out about the November dates about a week before the election, was left with 6 days to campaign. Nor was the public, the voters who associated with the Democratic Party in Puerto Rico, they weren't notified either. Although Chair Rodriguez referred to the margin, only 1,500 votes were cast in that entire election. Nobody knew about it. By contrast, in the presidential preference primary heard early in the summer, at the height of the pandemic, after the nominating contest had been decided, 6,300 voters participated. So Mr. Domenech lost to Mr. Davila Pernas. Mr. Domenech was the second highest vote getter. Both are members, it should be noted, of the statehood party locally. With respect to the handling of the challenge by the Democratic Party of Puerto Rico, 2 key points. First of all parties were not heard. Mr. Domenech was not given an opportunity to speak or present, either at the executive committee meeting of the Democratic Party of Puerto Rico or the full central committee meeting where the challenge was heard. And further, the other key point is that at no time during those proceedings did Mr. Davila Pernas disclose to the Democratic Party of Puerto Rico or its outside counsel, Mr. Indiano, that he had leased his home in Puerto Rico for 3.5 years, which was obviously a critical factor, as you heard from the hearing officer. With respect to the time and domiciles to be established, the Rosario case that Chair Rodriguez cited, first of all, that case laid out the very factors that the hearing officer applied in this case. But the issue of when domiciles to be established for the election of a member of DNC from Puerto Rico is by party rules. That case involved the public, election to public office. Party rules in Puerto Rico of the Democratic Party of Puerto Rico, as the hearing officer explained, clearly require that the candidate has to have been domiciled in Puerto Rico at the time they filed their candidacy in April of 2020. And as the hearing officer also pointed out, under the current Puerto Rico electoral code, the voter, while they generally have the right and power to determine domicile, it's conditioned on the voter maintaining constant access to their home they claim as domicile. Homes or dwellings leased or transferred of any kind that limit the voter's constant access shall not be considered as the voter's domicile. The hearing officer already went over these facts. I'll just touch on them briefly. Basically, in 2017, Mr. Davila Pernas worked for the Puerto Rico Federal Affairs Administration. At the end of 17, when he left that job, he made a decision to stay, live, and work in Washington, D.C. for the D.C. office of the DLA Piper law firm. And they leased their home and their property in Puerto Rico to somebody else at that point. And from that point on, through the end of 2020, the week before the election here, they had no place to stay in Puerto Rico of their own. They stayed with relatives. He had no residence. And as the hearing officer pointed out, in January 2020, before the pandemic really began, Mr. Davila Pernas extended the lease of his Puerto Rico property until mid-July. In other words, he didn't have any intention to be or live or work in Puerto Rico at the time of filing in April 2020, or the date the election was scheduled for in May of 2020, or the next date it was postponed to, or the following day. He was planning not to be in Puerto Rico on any of those dates. And under the Puerto Rico election code, he was not domiciled for electoral purposes at any of those times, and that alone is conclusive evidence he was not domiciled in Puerto Rico when he was required to be, which is when he filed for office. With respect to the other factors that the hearing officer considered, he talked about the place of voting. He may have been registered to vote in Puerto Rico, but he wasn't entitled to vote there in 2017, 18, 19, or 2020 until November. And in fact, he didn't vote in two key elections in 2020 and never satisfactorily explained why he didn't bother to ask for an absentee ballot, which he could have done. Two other key factors: the place of employment, as the hearing officer pointed out. His DLA Piper law firm, even looked at the website as we did at the hearing a couple of weeks ago. The law firm does not consider him to be affiliated in any way with the firm's Puerto Rico office. It's not on the list of lawyers practicing in Puerto Rico. And although he claimed to split his time equally, as the hearing officer explained, had that been the case, and he made over $5,000 in Puerto Rico source income, he would have been required to file tax returns and have withholdings from his income in Puerto Rico. He didn't file tax returns in 17, 18, or 19, and there was no withholding in 17, 18, 19, or 20. So that there's no possibility that he had, unless he's breaking the law, which we don't believe he would have, that he had any Puerto Rico source income or was resident or split his time in Puerto Rico as claimed. One other point is driver's license. It's something that's considered by the courts. It wasn't the case that Chair Rodriguez mentioned. He had a Virginia driver's license throughout this period. He also had a Puerto Rico license, which he was not entitled to retain under Virginia law, but he allowed that to expire in August 2020 and didn't have even a Puerto Rico driver's license in November when the election was held. So we understand, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, that Mr. Davila Pernas has expressed that his heart is in Puerto Rico and that he had always had a subjective intent to return there. But it's not enough to say, I left my heart in Puerto Rico. In the case that we cited in our brief, Garcia Perez, a couple moved from Puerto Rico to Florida. The husband worked in Miami. They rented their home in Puerto Rico. They had Florida driver's licenses. The husband said, well, he constantly thought about returning there. And he traveled there a number of times. But the court, this is a court of appeals for the First Circuit, held that the domicile of this couple was in Florida, and the court explained, quotes, a floating intention to return to a former domicile at some unspecified future date does not prevent a party from acquiring a new domicile. And the evidence is conclusive here, as the hearing officer found that Mr. Avila-Pernas acquired a new domicile in Virginia in 2018, beginning of 18, and that's who was domiciled throughout this period when he filed, when the election was scheduled for, until November of 2020. There are 5.4 million Puerto Ricans resident in the U.S., and I'm told that many of them hope and expect to return to the island someday. But that does not entitle them to vote in Puerto Rico, or to run for office for the local Democratic Party, or to represent Puerto Rico in the Democratic National Committee. And so for those reasons, we respectfully suggest that the hearing officer's determination that Mr. Avila-Pernas should not have been a candidate is well-founded, should be affirmed by this committee. That leaves the question of what to do about it. There is not a vacancy in this position. Mr. Avila-Pernas was never seated for this position because that's what the Credentials Committee has to decide. I mean, the DNC committeeman position, beginning with this meeting on Saturday, has not been filled, so there is no vacancy. We suggest that it must be viewed, this election must be viewed as if Mr. Avila-Pernas was not a candidate. The highest vote getter among the eligible candidates was Mr. Domenech, and he should be seated as the DNC committee man from Puerto Rico. Because this is not a vacancy situation where the central committee should be allowed to would be allowed to fill a vacancy as if somebody resigned, it was kicked off. Here the election was held, and one of the candidates was ineligible, and the next highest vote getter should be seated. If the committee decides to affirm the hearing officer's, I would say, implicit recommendation to possibly another election be held, we would urge at a minimum that there be a time limit set by this committee, that the committee, the Credentials Committee and the DNC closely supervise it to ensure this time that it's truly public, fair, and open, and that Mr. Domenech at least be seated on an interim basis for this Saturday's meeting and until that election can be held, so that Puerto Rico is not deprived of representation on the DNC during that period. It should not be a situation where the Central Committee fills a vacancy. It should be another public election, just as the first one was supposed to be. And then finally, as you noted, Mr. Chairman, we had asked the two individuals who participated in this matter at the lower stage of consideration at the Executive Committee in one case, and it voted in both cases voted for Mr. Avila-Pernas in the election for DNC member. We would respectfully request that they recuse themselves from the discussion and vote by members of this committee. And with that, I thank you very much for your time. We appreciate it.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Sandler. I appreciate that. That concludes the presentation by the challenging party. The challenged party, the respondent, is now recognized to present their arguments. You will have 15 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon to all my fellow DNC members. I want to thank you for allowing me to address you today. I'm currently speaking to you from our home in Guaynabo, Puerto Rico. Contrary to what the challenger in this case wants you to believe, I am, and I always have been, a Puerto Rico domicile. I was born and raised in Puerto Rico. I attended elementary, middle school, and high school, all in Puerto Rico. I attended college on the mainland and returned to Puerto Rico afterwards to pursue a career in law. I graduated from law school in 2011 and went to work as a law clerk for a justice of the Supreme Court of Puerto Rico. I also worked for a prominent Puerto Rico law firm and practiced there for 4 years. During that time, I married my high school sweetheart. She's sitting right next to me. Also born and raised in Puerto Rico. All of our families are down here. And we purchased a home, this house, where we're at right now. We had our first child, Lucia, who just turned 6, while living in this house. I have paid property taxes on this house every year, dating back to 2015. I'm registered to vote in Guaynabo, Puerto Rico. I have voted in every general election in Puerto Rico since 2008. I also voted on the 2012 referendum to amend Puerto Rico's state constitution and on the 2012, 2017, and 2020 plebiscites on Puerto Rico's status. I have never voted for the president and vice president of the United States, nor for the people who enact our laws in Congress. That is our colonial reality. Needless to say, I was never and I have never been registered to vote in Virginia, nor did I ever vote there. I acquired a Puerto Rico driver's license when I turned 16 years old, and I've had it renewed when required to do so under the law. And if anyone has any questions, here's my license. I currently hold 3 bank accounts in Puerto Rico. The mortgage on this house is held with a local Puerto Rico bank, and the mortgage payments for that loan are automatically drawn from another Puerto Rico bank checking account. I also hold a savings account in a local Puerto Rico bank. Me and my family are members of the Catholic Church in Puerto Rico. We were married under the same church. Our 2 children were baptized here as well. We even delayed the baptism of our youngest son, who was born prematurely in Fairfax, Virginia, and required special medical attention outside of Puerto Rico during the first year of his life, until we could baptize him in Puerto Rico. In January 2017, I was appointed to serve as Deputy Director and General Counsel of the Puerto Rico Federal Affairs Administration in Washington, D.C. I served in the Puerto Rico government through November of 2017. In early 2017, I was elected as Puerto Rico's National Committeeman to the DNC and have served uninterrupted for almost 5 years now. My previous election was also subject to a challenge before this Credentials Committee. Among other things, the challengers at the time alleged that I had lost my Puerto Rico domicile precisely because I worked in the governor's office in Washington, D.C. This Credentials Committee dismissed said challenge on August of 2019. More than 2 years removed from that decision, here I am, once again, facing another meritless and bogus challenge, questioning my roots, my domicile, and intent. I would like to take this moment to address some fallacies that have been included in the report and recommendation issued by the hearing officer. The challenger has time and time again attacked me on my alleged tax obligations. I pleaded to the hearing officer, and I plead this committee to not get distracted on such a clear smokescreen. I have been very clear and transparent about my taxes. I paid taxes in Puerto Rico in 2017. I did not file taxes in Puerto Rico in 2018 or 2019 simply because I didn't have any Puerto Rico sourced income for those years. I certified I paid taxes in Puerto Rico for 2020 because I did have Puerto Rico sourced income when we were able to finally come back amidst a global pandemic and finally occupy our house once again. The year 2018 and 2019 is simply irrelevant for purposes of determining my domicile. The election was not held in those years. It was held in 2020. The hearing officer disagreed. He states in his recommendation that his report takes a broader view, which encompasses a 4-year period. If this were a federal court, no judge would make such a determination. In federal court, a judge decides whether a person is domiciled for diversity purposes, starting on the moment when the claim is raised or filed in court. In this case, Mr. Domenech waited until November 2020, to challenge my candidacy. That is 36 hours before my election. He then refiled this claim before this committee, who returned it to the state party, who the executive committee unanimously determined to dismiss. And then it was referred to the Central Committee, who on a vote of 26 members to 2, voted in favor of dismissing the challenge. Mr. Domenech appealed that decision, and that is the reason we are here today. The challenger has gone as low as attacking me on the grounds of questioning whether I deliberately renounced my Puerto Rico domicile when me and my wife, as a family, decided to provide the best possible health care for our children in stateside or mainland hospitals. If this was bad, it was even worse that the hearing officer would allow Mr. Domenech to sit Dr. Victor Ramos as an expert witness, when Dr. Ramos is a member of the Central Committee and only one of 2 people who voted against dismissing the challenge at the local level. Our objections were timely raised and they were overruled by the hearing officer. As a matter of fact, more than 15 objections were raised during that hearing. All of them were overruled. The 3 objections that were raised by Mr. Sandler were all sustained. Mr. Lewis dismissed the validity as well of the Court of Appeals decision in the Rosselló case, which is determinative for this case. You already heard the state party chair talk about this decision, and I'll tell you and guide you through what it means. In the Rosselló case, even though Mr. Lewis dismissed the validity, we still entered it into evidence and even had Mr. Domenech read the court holding and the applicable articles of the Electoral Code. If you allow me, Mr. Chair, can I share my screen? I cannot hear you, Mr. Chair.
Yes, I'm sorry. I believe you can do that in your 15 minutes.
It says host disabled participant screen sharing. I believe I need to be allowed to do so.
Liz, can we help do that?
Chairman, we are looking into this at the moment.
Oh, I can do it now. I can do it now.
Yes, thank you.
They allowed me. Okay. No. I have no idea what's being shared right now. Are you looking at the decision? Does it say certified translation on the top?
Yes, it does.
Yes.
Yes, it does.
Okay, good. So this is the Court of Appeals decision that vacated and reversed a trial court decision that determined the validity or the domicile of now congressional delegate for Puerto Rico, Ricardo Rosselló Nevares. I'll read just 2 paragraphs of it so that you understand the timing and how Puerto Rico law operates in this case. And I'll read. As we indicated above, Article 8 of Act number 167/2020 requires that any person that is any candidate under Article 9 of this Act for a person who wins through write-in votes meet the requirements laid down therein. In order for this to be possible, the SEC must finish the vote count, issue the final and official result, and through a certification of final election, publish the names of the winners and special delegates. From that moment on, all the certified special delegates are obligated to meet the requirements of Article 7.2 and 10.11 of the Election Code. And I remind everyone that Mr. Lewis has used Article 5 of the Electoral Code to apply or to base his conclusion on this report. So the Electoral Code and Puerto Rico electoral law is the basis and is used as to decide this matter, was used by the hearing officer. However, in the event that any certified special delegate fails to comply with this mandate, it is also provided therein that such delegate can be disqualified through an action filed in the court of first instance, which initiates as the only process a special election to select a substitute for the disqualified congressional delegate. And now we go into the important part, when they apply the law to the facts in the case. Pursuant to the foregoing and with respect to Rosselló Nevares, the SEC should have issued a final election certification certifying that he had been elected by write-in votes as a special delegate to the U.S. House of Representatives. It would be from that moment on that Rosselló Nevares was obligated to meet the requirements of Article 7.2 and 10.11 of the Election Code and Article 8 of Act 167/2020. Furthermore, if the requirements laid down therein are not met, a disqualification action can be initiated against him in the Court of First Instance of San Juan. Contrary to what the hearing officer based his whole report and recommendation, central question presented to us here is whether I was domiciled in Puerto Rico at the time of the election and when I was certified as a winner and as National Committeeman of Puerto Rico. The answer is yes. Mr. Lewis begins his analysis section by referencing the Rosselló case. He correctly points out that the trial court's decision was reversed, but he completely ignores and obviates the reason for vacating said decision. He even cites Article 5.43b of the Electoral Code in his report to support his conclusion that I supposedly lost my domicile in Puerto Rico when I leased this house during the time that as I said multiple times during the hearing, I just couldn't afford a mortgage in Puerto Rico and a rental home in the Washington, D.C. area with one income within the family. The reality is that at the time of my election, I had already been occupying this house with my family, paying electricity bills, paying water bills, cable TV bills, while actually losing electricity literally every week since then. I exercised my constitutional right to vote on November 3rd, 2020, on the general election day in Puerto Rico. I went to my polling station in Guaynabo, my senatorial district of domicile, the only senatorial district of domicile that I've ever had in my life. I voted for the governor, for members of the legislature, for the mayor of Guaynabo. I also voted yes on the statehood plebiscite. All of these happened way before my re-election as national committeeman and way before the election of the members of the Democratic Party of Puerto Rico. According to Puerto Rico electoral law, I met every single requirement to the position at the time of the election. The fact that the hearing officer would recommend removing me as a member of the DNC on a mere technicality that I wasn't physically present in Puerto Rico in April 2020 shows how ludicrous this whole challenge is. And I would like to address the fact that I did extend the lease in January of 2020 for 6 months. My tenant asked me to do that. He was trying to purchase a home, and we talked about maybe having a month-to-month lease. We ended up having a 6-month lease so that he could have enough time to buy a house. If not for COVID, nothing would have precluded me to travel to Puerto Rico, maybe get a temporary location until my tenant vacated the property, and still be domiciled in Puerto Rico while doing that. I didn't have to occupy this very same house to have domicile. I could have done that anywhere else. But because of COVID, I couldn't get on a plane, put my whole family, my 2 young children and myself, and put everyone at risk just to meet, some requirement or some, electoral favorability for myself. I may not have been physically present in Puerto Rico in April 2020, but my heart and soul were certainly here. At the height of the peak pandemic, no one could claim I relinquished my rights as a Puerto Rico elector based on the fact that I refused to put my children and family on an airplane during such a global crisis. Even though the challenger's history with the DNC is not decisive on the question of domicile, to the extent that the challenger has requested he be seated as national committeeman as being the second vote getter, he opens the door to question his moral character and qualifications for the position. I have never intended to make this a personal matter. God knows I've been respectful in all times. But let it be clear to the members of this committee, Mr. Domenech is no saint. There is ample evidence that shows Mr. Domenech was arrested for 2 domestic violence incidents against his wife in 2018. The incidents were so vicious that he immediately resigned his position as a DNC at-large member and prompted a DNC spokesperson to issue public statements that there is no room for such behavior. And I'll end with this. Mr. Domenech brought shame upon himself, upon his family, and upon this Democratic National Committee. Now he intends to buy his way back into a DNC seat. I trust that this Credentials Committee will not allow this circus to continue and will move to dismiss this challenge. Thank you so much. I'm open to any questions that the members of the committee may have. Thank you.
And thank you very much. That concludes the presentation by the challenged party. Following the arguments, according to our rules, the committee has 30 minutes for debate. During debate, members may address questions to each party's counsel or representatives. Members may also address questions to our hearing officer, Michael Lewis. Members, if you have any comments or questions, please raise your hand via Zoom or send your question via chat to Liz. We will do our best to call on everyone in the order you seek recognition, but please be patient with us. And Liz, I would ask you to do me the favor of reading me any submitted questions that come in by chat, or identify for me any of the members who have raised their hands, and we'll work on that together if we could begin now. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. We will go to Belle Longhong with the first question.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. I do have a couple of questions, and it's a little bit of a head scratcher for me. So if I might, first I want to commend Mr. Lewis for the excellent job he did. But I also would like to ask Mr. Lewis a question to clarify his position. Clearly, he has spent, Mr. Lewis, you've spent a lot of time reviewing this case and in hearings and so forth. Could you explain a little bit more about the basis for your decision, on your recommendation rather, 1 and 2? On the one hand, if I understood correctly, you're saying Mr. Davila Pernas should be removed, but then on the other hand, maybe he shouldn't because he would be reinstated anyway. I think that's how I kind of read that recommendation. And then the second one, that you recommend that Mr. Domenech should not be installed, and you oppose it on the basis of the points that you made there. But on the points of opposition, I am wondering whether that actually supports keeping Mr. Pernas as a member. Could you please help me understand a little bit more your resolution, your recommendations?
I will try. Thank you for the question.
I am so sorry. I just got over red.
No. So as to the first recommendation, actually, just reading the entire history and record of this case, it wasn't that I thought that if my conclusion is that Mr. Davila Pernas was not domiciled in Puerto Rico at the time that he filed his candidacy. And the second part of the recommendation really was trying to be realistic, given at least my interpretation that there would be a vacancy. Now, you've just heard Mr. Sander argue otherwise, but my thought process was, if there is a vacancy, there appears to be a clear rule in the DPPR for filling those vacancies. And given the history among all of the parties here, it struck me that the Central Committee would simply reinstall Mr. Davila Pernas back into the position. And that struck me as not right. So it's not that I was trying to say that, okay, well, so he'll be back into the position. It is a fear that that's what the Central Committee might do. And that fear is just based on reading everything that I've read and trying to come to my recommendations. And as to the second recommendation, I mean, well, let me first stop and make sure that I've done as good a job as I can explaining number one,
Okay.
Or my thought process in any case.
Yeah, I guess my follow-on question to recommendation 1 is, as you were doing the assessment, the analysis, the assessment, the evaluation, did you consider the state parties' positions and their recommendations and their decisions in making your final recommendation?
Well, I surely did. And I read, in fact, there is in the materials, I don't know if you've had an opportunity to look at them, but there is a hearing, a meeting transcript from the Central Committee meeting of the DPPR that I read quite carefully, I think, or tried to in any case. Yes, I did take into consideration their thoughts. And frankly, it's why the second part of that recommendation is written the way it is. I mean, I feared that, should the Credentials Committee support my recommendation that, I'm sorry, should the Credentials Committee support my recommendation, the DPPR Central Committee will simply reinstall Mr. de Villaparnas to fill a vacancy. Now, if Mr. Sandler's theory is correct that there would not be a vacancy, I haven't actually thought through because I had not contemplated that possibility. The second recommendation, I'm sorry, what is your question about the second recommendation?
Bell, in
Yeah.
the interest of, we only have 30 minutes for different members to ask questions, Bell.
I will defer. I will
Thank you
defer.
so much.
But if I might, I'd like to come back a little bit later if there's time.
I'll note that. I'll try. Well, thank you. Luis Heredia, I think you're up next. I think, are you on mute?
Yeah,
Okay.
just got unmuted.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question is for the hearing officer, Mr. Lewis, on the grounds of I'm applying the logic of interjecting the Puerto Rico electoral code, and even to the extent, and I would call the extent of this body acting as a tax court or an authority in making sure that we understand all the technicalities. But my question is, does the Puerto Rico electoral code subject party offices to the strict interpretations of which you are applying domicile? Because if there is no reference in the Puerto Rico electoral code, then this body of the Credentials Committee has the jurisdiction to kind of decide these very gray areas in which we encounter oftentimes. And my consistency in making comments in this body is that there is no uniform application of these rules throughout our party in the territories or in the states. And so we always have to look at the matter of precedent, of looking, have we used tax records and other cases? And I did not find that in your hearing report. I also want to ask if the electoral code makes reference to party offices. If not, then it's just a jurisdiction of the Credentials Committee to look at a lot of the facts that are being presented. And I don't want to be, because I am not an expert in Puerto Rican electoral code, and that is a subject to candidates and other elected officials in Puerto Rico. But I am questioning the fact of how strict we are interpreting if the electoral code doesn't have references to party offices, because it's not present in the rules of the Puerto Rican party.
Well, what is in the rules of the Puerto Rican party, if I understand you, are the words that I read earlier about the senatorial district of domicile, and I'm just looking through here to find. I won't take time to find it, but oh yes, and senatorial district of domicile. Those words come from the rules of the DPPR, Rule 3.D.4. So, to my knowledge, and I am also not an expert in Puerto Rico electoral law. To my knowledge, the electoral code doesn't reference party offices.
Okay, very good. Does that answer the question?
Yes, it does. I mean, I just want to, just a quick comment. I mean, the rules of the Puerto Rican Party, Democratic Party, the office holders are also broken down in senatorial districts. So I just want to kind of bring into the discussion the reason, and if domicile isn't clearly defined in the rules of the party, because the electoral code is something we could accept as a body of rules. And again, I'm calling the consideration and even the time spent on tax issues to be outside of what we could clearly understand. And even to the point of the discussion on healthcare and some other items, I just find those to be a very, I don't think this body should be entertaining that, as well as any prior incident to the challenger's history. So, let me be clear with that. But the point is that the reason I believe that domicile of senatorial districts is because throughout the rules of the Puerto Rican Democratic Party, office holders are actually subject to the senatorial districts. So let me just kind of like present where my thought process is in this issue. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Now, Liz, I believe there's a queue, so I'm going to defer to you, and you've got folks lined up, but we only have something under 20 minutes.
Yes.
So ask everybody to please be as brief as possible to let as many people on the committee speak as we can. Thank you, Liz.
Thank you, Chairman. We have a question from the chat. It is from Claire Lucas. Her question is, if Mr. Davila's candidacy was not valid, what are the party rules concerning the second vote getter?
Do we have an answer from the parliamentarian on that, or the legal counsel, I should say? Let us get back to you on that.
And I just wanted to say one other thing. If this was 18 or 19, like I think I'm pretty clear on what domicile is all about. If it was 18 or 19, I think for me at least, Mr. Davila's domicile is pretty clear. However, when we get into COVID, I just think that so many things change and it's hard to really know what somebody's intent was regarding flying and so forth. So I'm a little bit muddled just for myself, as I think probably some of the other members are, but was it his intent to be in Puerto Rico or not? And I think that's hard to know, at least for myself, because I think COVID changes many things.
Okay.
At least if that.
I was just going to offer, I'm looking at the DNC charter and bylaws now regarding the question about if it's not a vacancy, but rather, a situation where the question about the second vote getter. So I'll be back in touch on that.
Okay. Thank you. Liz?
Yes. Our next question is from Manuel Ortiz. Manuel, you'll be unmuted and you can speak shortly.
Yes, thank you. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can.
Mr. Jacobs, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for chairing this meeting. This is my last meeting of the committee, so I appreciate all my colleagues here. We've had a few of these challenges, and I appreciate everybody's collaboration and good work. We always get to the right outcome. So on to my comments. So I'm Puerto Rican, live in Puerto Rico, and been in DC for many years previously. I have seen the Democratic Party in Puerto Rico go from a country club of a few members using the Central Committee to elect themselves to, for the first time in many years, having a free and fair elections for all their officers. Something that I appreciated and value, and given the feedback from the leadership, the DNC leadership, that we needed to do this, I commend Mr. Rodriguez's effort to get us in that path. Now, this challenge is hard to understand, and the report is also, and I commend Mr. Lewis for getting into the facts, but by no means I think he's even said he's not a tax lawyer or a tax expert. He's also conceded that he's not a Puerto Rico law expert. But when it's all said and done, is the will of the people was clear. And for me, that's the standard. And then we go into this case, we got to figure out, okay, what's the standard for overturning the will of the people? And when I look at this report, because Mr. Sandler is a wonderful attorney and I've used him in the past, so he's fantastic. He's going to make a very good case, and he did so. But Florida law is irrelevant here. It's Puerto Rico law. And as far as I'm concerned, the highest court in Puerto Rico ruled that you have a candidate residency only matters when he gets certified. And then from then on, his domicile is what matters. So we have law that is absolutely clear. For whatever reason, Mr. Lewis did not go into that. In fact, I got a question for Mr. Lewis. How, being a arbiter, how could you allow a testimony from a challenger that chooses his client to be an expert in the case, and you leave him on without no conflict of interest? I just don't understand. Mr. Victor, who's offered up, is a client of the challenger. So it just brings, to me, let's go back to the substance. To me, it's all about whether or not the petitioner has done enough to overrule the will of the people. And I like to get a little more guidance from Mr. Lewis. If in fact he thinks that Mr. Pernas, Davila Pernas, needs to leave, be removed, why, based on law, not fact? I think it's a high bar to put COVID facts, analysis on facts during COVID, and a very complicated residency domicile fact pattern under COVID. The law is very clear. Mr. Lewis admits in the report that he has by any stretch, he has Mr. Davilas has regained his residency, both certification that's consistent with the law, and there's no clear solution, since the Central Committee is the one that opines on decides who gets the vacancy. This by certainly no means that he's going to be a slam dunk to be removed, but the will of the people is very clear. 78% of the votes and thousands of people went out and voted and elected this man. I'm not sure there's a, so I like Mr. Lewis. Sorry for the rambling. I'm filibustering here, but sorry, Mr. Chairman, but I really would like to hear from Mr. Lewis some of these legal questions. Why is he ignoring Puerto Rico state law?
Can I just interject for a second? We have a legal question up, and our attorney Graham Wilson, I think, is prepared to give us an answer on some of this, and then I'll continue on with that. Mr. Wilson.
Yes, thank you. I think to the other question of, kind of what is before this committee, that I think there's a question about what is historic practice. And usually the way this works, although different challenges are different, is that this committee evaluates the credential that was awarded by the state party, and whether that credential is valid is the typical approach, rather than awarding a credential or determining whose credential it should be awarded to. So I think the question before the committee here is this a valid credential for the challenged party? And that determination doesn't necessarily reach the next question, which is, should there be another election? Is there a vacancy? Generally, that is left to the state party. And then the state party awards credentials or elects people as it will, and we can evaluate that as it comes up. But there's a credential before the committee, and that specific credential is the one we're evaluating today.
Well, that clarifies that issue, and I appreciate that. Now, Mr. Lewis, you were asked a question, so if I can go back to you, just to be fair, if you can answer the question that was asked.
My answer is I did. Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt.
No, go ahead, sir.
My answer is I did not think that, in fact, I was issuing a report that was contrary to Puerto Rican electoral law.
Thank you. Okay.
I think that was the question that was raised.
I think it's some in substance. Liz, who's next?
Yes, thank you. Next up, we have Isabelle Framer. We will unmute your microphone and feel free to ask your question.
Isabelle Framer?
You're unmuted.
Okay, finally. I think I was playing with it while you were doing that. Thank you very much. And Thank you for everybody that is here. Mr. Chair, I have one comment and a question, and a comment I think is important as far as our DNC and our Credentials Committee. And I know that you early on said that the DNC does not have any statement or any rules about asking someone to recuse themselves if they're from Puerto Rico, because we're listening on an issue about Puerto Rico. And I just want to make it clear that I'm not from Puerto Rico, but I am Latina. And to ask, to me, when we ask someone from a particular state, country, or of ethnic group to recuse themselves because they're of that ethnicity is wrong. It's like asking me to recuse myself because I speak Spanish. So I just want to make that clear moving forward, that it's important that, you know, our committees and lawyers understand that. But my question is really, I have to say that I'm in agreement with Mr. Heredia and Mr. Ortiz as far as also dealing with going with the vote of the people. And since Puerto Rico had opened it up for, you know, to have more people vote on an election, and the people spoke, I also feel that it's not, you know, in our, what's the word I'm trying to find, that it's not up to us to take away what the people of Puerto Rico had voted on. Okay, so as far as domicile and residence, because I'm not from Puerto Rico, and I'm not a lawyer, you know, that does get kind of, you know, I can't translate that. But what I would like to hear from, if it's possible, is from Chair Rodriguez, who stated that he had legal counsel, and he had legal counsel, a counsel that was in Puerto Rico, that understands the Puerto Rican laws and understands, you know, the whole process of Puerto Rico. So I like to hear from him as to, for him to maybe explain to us briefly the difference between residence, domicile, and intent.
If I could, I'm going to permit that, of course, for Chairman Rodriguez, but after he finishes, and please be as brief as you can, we're running against the clock, I'm going to ask Mr. Sandler to give a response on the law in a moment. Let us hear from the chairman, and then I'm going to get Mr. Sandler to answer the question on the law as well.
Thank you. In Puerto Rico, to determine domicile, it is important to look at the totality of the circumstances, not just one issue or fact. In that sense, when we examine the challenge, we locally at the executive committee and at the central committee, we examined the totality of the circumstances, and we came to the conclusion that Mr. Davila was a resident domicile in Puerto Rico. He was registered to vote in Puerto Rico. He was never challenged in terms of his voting qualifications in Puerto Rico. He pays taxes in Puerto Rico. He has presence in Puerto Rico. His only house is in Puerto Rico. And we looked at what the court recently decided, that said that you have to look to decide domicile or residency. You have to look at the time when the person is elected or is certified. When he was elected and certified, there's no doubt, as Mr. Lewis recognizes, he was domiciled in Puerto Rico.
Thank you. Now, briefly, Mr. Sandler, you may have something on the legal aspect of this that was asked as well.
Yes.
Okay, there you go.
So two different issues. The time at which domicile needs to be established, that's a party rule. Democratic Party of Puerto Rico says it's the time you file your candidacy. Whether you're domiciled for voting purposes across the board, that's dictated by the Puerto Rico Electoral Code, which says if you have a home but you've leased it, you're not domiciled there. It's that clear and that simple. That law does apply for determining whether, if he wasn't entitled to vote, he's not domiciled for electoral purposes. That's it.
Thank you. Thank you. Liz, where are we next?
Yes, next up we have Selena Vasquez. Selena, we will mute your microphone and feel free to ask your question.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm Selena Vasquez from Texas. Thank you all for allowing us the opportunity to ask questions. I believe this question might be for you, Mr. Lewis. This is regarding the income taxes, because I agree, as several people said, you know, I am not an expert on income taxes. Someone said someone used 4 years, and then I was wondering why we hadn't used 6 years. And then it was also stated that Mr. Davila did file income taxes in 2017 in Puerto Rico and 2020, just not in 2018 and 2019. So the first question is that correct? Did I hear that correctly? Number one. And then number two, in terms of the totality of circumstances, you know, Mr. Lewis, how many years of tax records did you review, or I guess take into consideration in your recommendations?
So it really wasn't a question. Thank you for your question. It really wasn't a question of reviewing years of tax records. The parties stipulated, in other words, Mr. Davila Parnas agreed that he had not paid taxes and income taxes in Puerto Rico in 2018 or 2019, but did begin paying them in 2020. My conclusion was that he lost his domicile in probably 2018, a year in which he was not paying income taxes to Puerto Rico.
And then I guess the follow-up question would be for Mr. Davila is, can he tell us the years that he did pay?
Sure. I paid in 2017 and 2020, 2018 and 2019. As I said before, I didn't have Puerto Rico sourced income and I didn't pay taxes in Puerto Rico. I would like to have an opportunity to respond as well to the electoral law question, since Mr. Sandler and the challenger were afforded time. I would like to request equal time to address that as well, if I'm permitted.
What I would ask is, I think we have, I apologize, but I think we have the back and forth on that particular issue, and I'd like to get more members involved here. Liz, do we have another?
We have time for one more question. The last question will go to Michael Kapp.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Michael Kapp from California here. I want to reiterate what Council has shared, since I believe this is not only a very important reminder for this committee, but also for rank and file Democratic Party members who are watching today. There is no precedent for this committee to install one candidate over another. It's not our job to pick winners and losers. Our authority is limited to vacating elections to the DNC, only if that's necessary, of course. The Credentials Committee should not and cannot impose candidates who did not win election on state parties as DNC members.
That's
all. Thank you, sir.
Mr. Kapp, I appreciate that. Now, if I could, I want to note that our 30 minutes is about up. And so I want to thank everybody for your thoughtful questions and discussions. We're going to have a further discussion on a motion, but I'd like to see it at this moment. We should consider a resolution to deal with this matter of the pending challenge. And so on that basis, I'm going to recognize Belinda Villafor for the purpose of offering a resolution to dispose of this challenge. Ms. Villafor.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. In the challenge of Francisco Dominique, challenger to the credentialing of Luis Davila Parnas, the national committeeman seat in the Democratic Party of Puerto Rico, DPPR, and as such, a member of the Democratic National Committee, the DNC, from Puerto Rico, the challenged party. Before the Credentials Committee of the DNC, the committee recommends and orders as follows. Whereas election for national committeemen from Puerto Rico was held during a meeting of the DPPR General Assembly on November 21, 2020. And whereas the challenged party was declared and certified the winner of that election by DPPR in accordance with DNC bylaws, Article 2, Section 4AI, and whereas the challenger has challenged the qualification of the challenged party as a candidate for national committeeman, alleging that the challenged party was not domiciled in Puerto Rico, and whereas the DNC charter and bylaws require the national committeeman from Puerto Rico to be selected in accordance with the DPPR rules, and whereas the DPPR rules require candidates for national committeeman to be domiciled in Puerto Rico, and whereas the DNC bylaws, Article 2, Section 4B, requires the national committeeman from Puerto Rico to be a resident of Puerto Rico for voting purposes, and Puerto Rico's election code requires voters to be domiciled in Puerto Rico, and whereas a hearing officer was appointed pursuant to Rule 6G of the Rules of Procedure of the Committee, and whereas a virtual evidentiary hearing was conducted by the hearing officer on this matter on September 15th, 2021, and whereas the hearing officer has issued to the committee and to the parties his report and recommendations following that hearing, and whereas the parties have had an opportunity to be heard by the committee pursuant to Committee Rule 6H2, now therefore, based on the record and proceedings before it, the Credential Committee finds that the challenged party was domiciled in Puerto Rico at the time of his candidacy for national committeeman, as required by the DPPR rules and the DNC charter and bylaws. The committee hereby resolves that the challenge be denied and that Luis Davala Pernas should remain credentialed as a member of the DNC. So resolved and so ordered this 7th day of October 2021.
And is there a second for that? Liz, do we have a second?
Chairman?
Yes.
Yes, we do. Isabelle Framer has raised their hand to make the second.
Okay, then we now will go per our rules. The proposed resolution will be discussed for a maximum of 20 minutes with time equally divided between proponents and opponents of the resolution as best possible. If you wish to be recognized, please raise your hand via Zoom or send your chat to Liz. We will do our best to call on everyone in the order you seek recognition, and I ask you please to be as brief as possible. We do only have 20 minutes. Thank you. Liz, I'll leave it to you to indicate who was going to be asked to speak.
Chairman, please give me one moment. I'm so sorry.
That's okay. We won't start the clock till you begin.
Okay, we have a hand raised with Manuel Ortiz.
Okay. Mr. Ortiz.
Mr. Chairman, I third the motion or second the motion, support the resolution, and the will of the people should be respected. Deference should be given to the local party and the elections. The matters at hand are very complex. Tax and domicile matters are extremely difficult, especially under a year of COVID. So I fully intend to support the resolution. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you. Liz, next.
Chairman, at this time, there are no hands up, no hands raised, and no questions in the chat.
Okay, then. Then I just wait a moment further. The resolution, if you could push the resolution down a bit so we get to the bottom line of it. Maybe make it a little bit bolder or larger so you can read it. That's
Chairman,
possible. Yeah.
also just wanted to note here, we do have a hand raised in our queue. We have Selena Vasquez.
Sure. Okay.
Selena will unmute you shortly.
Okay. Ms. Vasquez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In looking at the totality of circumstances on this particular matter, the question of domicile, is, very concerning to me. I think that at this time, I do agree with the state party when they talked about the totality of circumstances, looking at all of the issues that were occurring at the time, especially when the filing was done. So at this time, I am prepared to support this motion at this time, and do believe that Mr. Davila Pernas should be credentialed.
Thank you. I could ask that we could go back to the regular screen. I think everybody has had an opportunity to see the resolution. It has been read according to Robert's rules. So if we could do that, I appreciate that. Liz, are there any other people that need to say something? Or?
Chairman, at this time, we have no further questions.
Very well, then. I'm going to ask the members to begin the process. We're going to begin the vote. I'm going to call for a roll call vote. Members of the resolution before the committee, I don't need to summarize it. It has been up. It has been read. A vote in favor of the resolution means that if you are in favor of the resolution, it means that you are voting to reject the challenge and sustain the committeeman's election. So a vote in favor, a vote yes, would mean that you are agreeing with the motion and rejecting the challenge. A vote against the resolution means that you are voting to reject the motion and you do want to support the challenge. I hope everybody understands that. I will now ask Helen to call the roll. When your name is called, if you would vote either in favor of the resolution, as I've just described, to reject the challenge and seat the member, you say aye. If you oppose the resolution, please say no. If you're holding a proxy, when that person's name is called, please respond to cast their vote by saying your name and then that you're holding that proxy and how you vote. Thank you. Helen?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Biafra, how do you vote?
Aye.
Ms. Biafra votes for. Mr. Boland?
Aye.
Mr. Boland votes for. Ms. Estrada? She was absent earlier. Okay. Ms. Framer?
Aye. Aye.
Framer votes for. Mr. Fry?
Yes. Aye.
Fry votes in favor. Ms. Gazelle, she was absent earlier. She's not come in. Mr. Heredia?
Aye.
Mr. Heredia votes yes. Mr. Cap?
Nay.
Mr. Cap votes no. Ms. Young Hong?
Unmute. Aye.
Ms. Young Hong votes yes. Ms. Lucas? That was a yes, Ms. Lucas?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Mr. Martinez gave his proxy to Ms. Liang Hong.
Leopoldo also votes aye.
Yes, for Mr. Martinez. Ms. Nolasco? She was here. Yes, for Ms. Nolasco.
Yes. Aye.
Mr. Ortiz?
Aye. The will of the people.
Ortiz votes yes. Ms. Penske gave her proxy to Ms. Lucas.
Ms. Penske votes aye.
Ms. Penske is recorded as aye. Ms. Vasquez?
Valid.
I'm sorry, that's an aye?
Yes, the credential is valid. Thank you.
Ms. Vasquez votes yes. Mr. Wabi has left. He gave his proxy to Mr. Jacobs.
He votes aye.
Wabi votes yes. Mr. Wade, he remains absent. Ms. Ward, she remains absent. Mr. Chairman, do you choose to exercise your vote?
Yes, I vote aye.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. All committee members, I can count them, have voted yes with one no. So we have 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. I count 14 yes, 1 no, Mr. Chairman.
That concurs with my vote. With 14 voting in favor of the motion and 1 voting against the motion is approved. And so the challenge has not been accepted. I want to thank all of you and all the members of the Credentials Committee, all members, for your thoughtful attention and consideration of this matter. I appreciate your commitment to this committee and to our party. The recommendation of the Credentials Committee on how this challenge should be resolved will be now submitted to the full Democratic National Committee as a part of the report of this committee. Our report will also include the decision from our meeting on June the 15th that denied the challenge to the election of the DNC members from West Virginia. Thank you again to the DNC staff, our parliamentarian, our council, and our technical support team. And thanks to all of you for your service on this committee. We have completed our business, and as such, without objection, the meeting is adjourned. Please stay safe and healthy. Thank you all very much.